My name is Ruby, and at 58 years old, I've built my chain of high-end boutiques from nothing but determination and countless sleepless nights. My son Tyler was just 2 when his father walked out on us, leaving me to raise him alone, while fighting to keep my first small store afloat. I sacrificed everything to give that boy the best life possible, including an Ivy League education that cost more than most people's homes. When he got engaged to Audrey, I was thrilled until I received that text 2 days before their wedding. The wedding I paid $200,000 for. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button to hear how I responded when my own son told me I wasn't good enough for his big day. I grew up in Meadowbrook, Michigan, a town so small that the welcome and goodbye signs stood on the same post. My parents worked at the local factory, making just enough to keep food on the table for me and my 3 siblings. College was never an option for us. It was understood that high school graduation meant entering the workforce immediately. By 18, I was working 3 jobs: mornings at the diner, afternoons at the library, and weekends at a clothing store. That last job sparked something in me. I loved helping women find outfits that made them feel beautiful and confident. I started studying fashion magazines, learning about fabrics cuts and trends during lunch breaks and late into the night. When I was 23, I had saved $12,000, every spare penny for 5 years. It wasn't much to start a business, but with a small bank loan and more determination than experience, I opened Ruby's Closet in a tiny storefront with a leaky roof and unreliable heating. Those first years were brutal. I worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week, sleeping on a cot in the stockroom to save on rent. Then James walked into my shop on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. He was handsome, charming, and looking for a gift for his mother. One conversation led to another, and soon we were dating. He had such big dreams and charisma that filled any room. 6 months later, we were married in a simple ceremony at the local courthouse. When I became pregnant with Tyler at 29, I was overjoyed. James seemed excited too, picking out baby clothes and talking about teaching our son to play baseball. Those early days with baby Tyler were exhausting, but magical. James would walk him around our small apartment when he was colicky, singing off-key lullabies, while I caught a precious hour of sleep before heading to the store. I'll never forget the morning everything changed. Tyler was 2 years and 3 months old. I woke to find James's side of the bed empty, along with his closet and drawers. He left a note on the kitchen counter. "I'm not cut out for this life. I'm sorry." That was it. No explanation, no contact information, nothing. Just empty space where a husband and father should have been. What I discovered in the following days made the abandonment even worse. James had taken our savings, maxed out our credit cards, and left behind significant debt I hadn't known about. Not only was I suddenly a single mother, but my fledgling business was on the verge of collapse under this new financial burden. Those next few years blur together in my memory, a marathon of working, parenting, and barely surviving. I would open the store with Tyler playing in a playpen in the back room close for an hour to take him to preschool work through lunch to pick him up, then bring him back to the store until closing time. After putting him to bed, I would work on inventory and bookkeeping until my eyes couldn't stay open. Slowly, incredibly, the business began to grow. My personalized approach and carefully curated selections drew customers from neighboring towns. By the time Tyler started elementary school, I had paid off James's debts and was able to hire my first employee. When Tyler was 8, I opened a second location in a more affluent town 20 miles away. Every step of business growth was calculated around Tyler's needs. Could I afford a better school district piano lessons he wanted summer camp with his friends? My own needs always came last. New business equipment was delayed, so Tyler could have braces. A potential third location was postponed to pay for his private middle school tuition. I never wanted him to feel the lack of a father. I attended every baseball game, science fair, and parent conference. I learned to throw a decent curveball to practice with him, helped with math homework that eventually surpassed my own education level, and made sure he never missed a birthday party or school trip due to financial constraints. Tyler was a good kid, bright, popular, and usually kind, but there were signs of entitlement that worried me. When other children would express gratitude for special opportunities, Tyler often took them as his due. The private school environment, while educationally excellent, surrounded him with children from wealth I could only mimic through extraordinary effort. The watershed moment came when Tyler was 14. He was invited to join his friend's family at their lake house for a weekend, but needed proper clothes for the yacht club dinner. I explained that we needed to be budget conscious that month due to tax payments for the business. "But Mom," he had protested, "everyone will know I don't belong there if I don't have the right clothes." Those words cut deep, but I hid my hurt. The next day, I took a small business loan to open a third location earlier than planned, using the first disbursement to buy Tyler the expensive clothes he needed to fit in. Getting Tyler into Westlake Academy for high school nearly broke me financially, but it offered connections and opportunities I couldn't provide otherwise. The annual tuition was more than many families' entire income, requiring me to expand to a fourth location in a risky market just to manage the payments. The gamble paid off. Tyler graduated with honors and was accepted to Cornell University. I still remember holding that acceptance letter, tears streaming down my face. My son would have opportunities I had never dared dream of for myself. The Ivy League price tag was staggering, $75,000 per year. I mortgaged my business properties to create a fund that would cover his education without burdening him with student loans. When he expressed interest in studying abroad his junior year, I took out an additional equity line on my home. I drove 6 hours each way to visit him monthly, always bringing care packages and taking him and his friends for nice dinners. Those visits became less frequent at his request as he became involved in campus activities and internships. Still, I called weekly and sent packages even when he forgot to thank me for them. The subtle changes in Tyler were almost imperceptible at first. References to friends' family vacations in Europe became comparisons where our modest trips to the beach fell short. Questions about my business became less frequent, replaced by stories about his friends' parents who ran investment firms or surgical practices. At his graduation, I wore the most expensive outfit I had ever purchased, a designer dress and shoes that cost nearly $3,000. I wanted to look appropriate standing next to the parents of his friends. Even so, I felt the evaluating glances from other families, the silent assessment of my worth based on visible markers of wealth. Tyler introduced me to his professors and friends with the quick addition, "My mom runs some boutiques," minimizing the business I had built from nothing into a regional chain with 27 employees. I swallowed my hurt, focusing instead on my pride in his accomplishments. As we took photos after the ceremony, I overheard a classmate's mother asking Tyler, "And what does your father do?" Before I could feel the familiar sting of that question, Tyler replied, "He's not in the picture. It's just been my mom." In that moment, the sacrifices felt worth it. Despite everything, he acknowledged me as sufficient. Little did I know how quickly that would change. Tyler landed a position at Meridian Financial in Chicago, a prestigious firm where entry-level analysts were selected as much for their family backgrounds as their qualifications. He moved into a downtown apartment that I helped furnish, though he insisted the decor needed to be appropriate for entertaining colleagues. 6 months into his new job, Tyler mentioned meeting someone special. Her name was Audrey Harrison, another analyst whose father was an executive at First Continental Bank. Their first date had been at the Symphony, followed by dinner at a restaurant where the chef personally greeted Audrey's family whenever they dined there. "She's different, Mom," Tyler told me during one of our increasingly rare phone calls. "She comes from this amazing family with connections everywhere. Her summer home in Martha's Vineyard is where she grew up sailing. Can you believe it?" I was genuinely happy that Tyler had found someone he admired, though a small voice inside me worried about his evident fascination with her family's status. 3 months later, he asked if I would come to Chicago to meet her. I spent hours preparing for that dinner, researching the restaurant to understand its dress code, reading about Audrey's family background online, and selecting a tasteful gift, a pair of artisan silver earrings from a designer who supplied my boutiques. The restaurant was exactly as intimidating as I had anticipated, with multiple forks and servers who appeared silently beside the table. Audrey was beautiful in that effortless way that often comes from generations of privilege: sleek blonde hair, impeccable posture, and clothes that whispered rather than announced their expense. "It's lovely to meet you, Mrs. Crawford," she said, extending her hand with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Tyler has told me how hard you've worked with your shops." "Boutiques," Tyler corrected quickly. "Mom has a chain of boutiques across Michigan and Indiana." The subtle distinction seemed important to him, and I noted how he straightened his posture as he spoke about my business, upgrading it in his description. Throughout dinner, Audrey asked polite questions about my work, but I caught the fleeting looks when I mentioned hands-on aspects of retail: inventory management, customer service challenges, employee training. When I used the word sale rather than event to describe a seasonal promotion, Tyler flinched visibly. When the check arrived, I reached for it, a gesture of maternal pride. But Tyler intercepted it with a speed that suggested we had rehearsed this moment. "Mom," he murmured quietly, "Audrey's father always handles the check when he joins us. It's expected." That night in my hotel room, I stared at the ceiling, replaying the dinner conversation and wondering when my son had begun to see me through someone else's eyes. The next morning, Tyler met me for breakfast without Audrey. He seemed more relaxed, more like the son I recognized. "Audrey really liked you," he said, though something in his expression suggested qualification was coming. "She just mentioned that maybe next time you could wear something a bit more conservative. The neckline on your dress was a little low for the venue." The dress had been a boat neck that revealed nothing but my collarbones. I understood then that the issue wasn't modesty, but the visible evidence of my age, the slight creasing of skin that no expensive fabric could completely disguise. Over the next several months, Tyler and Audrey's relationship intensified. My invitations to visit Chicago were met with scheduling conflicts and rain checks. When they did come to Michigan, they stayed in a hotel rather than my guest room, citing convenience to some event or another. 9 months after they began dating, Tyler called with excitement in his voice. "Mom, I proposed. Audrey said yes." My heart swelled with genuine happiness for him. "That's wonderful news. Tell me everything. How did you propose?" "At her parents' lake house. Her dad helped me plan it. The whole family was there. It was perfect." His voice softened. "I used Grandma's ring like we talked about." My mother's ring. The one thing of value she had left me, the one I had given Tyler with the story of how my father had worked double shifts for a year to afford it. At least this piece of our family history would continue. "When can I help with wedding plans?" I asked, already thinking of venues in Michigan that might accommodate their needs. There was a slight pause. "Actually, the wedding will be in Greenwich. Audrey's family has connections to a historical estate there. It's where all the Harrison women get married." Of course. A destination wedding in one of the wealthiest communities in America. I swallowed hard and kept my voice bright. "That sounds lovely. Just let me know what you need from me." 2 weeks later, I received an invitation to the engagement party at the Harrison family estate. I bought a new dress, midnight blue, elegant but not showy, and flew to Connecticut with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The Harrison estate was intimidating in its understated grandeur, the kind of home where wealth is so ingrained in its foundations that nothing needs to announce itself. Manicured gardens, antique furnishings that had clearly been in the family for generations, and staff who moved with practiced invisibility. Audrey's mother, Catherine Harrison, greeted me with the practiced warmth of someone who has mastered the art of social inclusion while maintaining invisible boundaries. "Ruby, how delightful you could make it. What an interesting pin you're wearing." The pin had been my mother's, not valuable but sentimental. "Thank you. It was my mother's. She loved butterflies." How charming, she replied in a tone that suggested the opposite. Audrey has her great-grandmother's sapphires for something blue. Family traditions are so important, don't you think? Throughout the evening, I was introduced as Tyler's mother, with no further elaboration, while other parents were presented with their professional credentials: doctors, judges, executives. I overheard Catherine Harrison referring to my businesses as quaint little shops while speaking to another guest. During dinner, I found myself seated far from Tyler at a table with distant relatives and family friends who spoke of private schools I had never heard of and clubs I would never be invited to join. I maintained my smile, asking appropriate questions and feigning interest in summer plans for Nantucket and skiing holidays in Gstaad. After dinner, champagne flowed as Audrey's father gave a toast welcoming Tyler to their family. I watched my son standing beside his future in-laws, looking more comfortable in their world than he ever had in mine. When it came time for family photos, I was waved over almost as an afterthought. Later, as guests began to depart, I found a quiet moment with Tyler on the terrace. "The Harrisons certainly know how to host a beautiful event," I said, searching for neutral ground. "They do everything right," he agreed, his eyes scanning the gathering rather than meeting mine. "Audrey's mom has offered to handle all the wedding planning. She has a vision for everything." "I'd love to help too," I offered. "Maybe with the flowers or the menu tasting." He patted my hand distractedly. "Don't worry about it, Mom. They have people for all that. The best planners in Greenwich." I took a deep breath. "Tyler, I'd like to contribute financially to the wedding. It's traditionally the bride's family, I know, but I've saved for your wedding since you were small." This caught his attention. "Really? That would actually be great. Mr. Harrison mentioned the budget yesterday, and it's pretty substantial." "How substantial?" I asked. When he named the figure, $200,000, I kept my expression neutral despite my internal shock. It was more than I had anticipated, but not impossible. I would need to postpone the expansion of my flagship store and possibly take a small business loan, but I could manage it. "I can cover that," I said simply. Tyler's expression shifted to surprise, then calculation. "Seriously, the Harrisons assumed they'd pay most of it since they assumed I couldn't afford it," I finished for him. "I've done well, Tyler. My business has grown every year." For a moment, I glimpsed my real son beneath the polished veneer he had adopted. "That would be amazing, Mom. It would actually solve some tension. Audrey's dad is pretty old-fashioned about the bride's family handling everything." "Consider it my gift to you both," I said, meaning every word despite the sacrifice it represented. "I want your day to be perfect." That night in my hotel room, I made calculations and phone calls rearranging finances to accommodate this unexpected expense. It would be tight, but seeing Tyler's face when I offered had been worth it. For the first time since he'd met Audrey, he had looked at me with something approaching his old admiration. I didn't yet understand that this financial contribution would become my only significant role in my son's wedding, or that even this role would eventually be deemed insufficient. The 6 months leading up to the wedding became an exercise in patience and swallowed pride. After my financial commitment was established, I was added to planning emails but rarely consulted on actual decisions. The prestigious wedding planner the Harrisons hired, Vivian, would occasionally copy me on messages with phrases like, "as discussed with the primary families," meaning the Harrisons and Tyler, but not me. My first real attempt at involvement came during venue selection. The Harrisons had initially proposed their country club, but concerns about capacity led to considering alternatives. I researched options and found a beautiful historic mansion with gardens that cost significantly less while offering more charm. I created a presentation with photos and sent it to the planning group. 3 days later, Vivian replied to everyone except me, presenting the final decision. The Rosewood Estate, the most expensive venue on the original list, requiring an additional $50,000 beyond the already substantial budget. This decision was presented as finalized before I had even been consulted about the increased cost. When I called Tyler to discuss it, he sounded distracted. "Mom, the Rosewood is where Connecticut weddings happen. Audrey's parents renewed their vows there for their 30th anniversary." "It's beautiful," I acknowledged, "but it's significantly over budget." "Mr. Harrison said not to worry about that," Tyler replied. "He said you agreed to cover the core expenses and they'll handle any upgrades." I took a deep breath. "Tyler, I wasn't consulted about this change, and an additional $50,000 isn't a minor upgrade." There was a pause before he responded, his voice taking on an edge I'd never heard directed at me before. "Mom, please don't make this difficult. The Harrisons are expecting a certain standard. I can't ask them to compromise on Audrey's dream wedding." "I'm not asking for compromise," I clarified. "I'm asking for consideration and communication before decisions that affect my financial commitment are made." "Fine," he sighed. "I'll talk to Mr. Harrison about splitting the additional cost." But the check for the venue deposit arrived in my email the next day with the full amount expected from me. I paid it without further comment, recognizing the battle wasn't worth the potential damage to my relationship with Tyler. This pattern continued with each wedding element. The florist I suggested, who supplied arrangements for my high-end boutiques, was dismissed as too commercial. The caterer was selected without my input, despite my request to be involved in menu tastings. When I offered to arrange transportation for out-of-town guests, I was informed that the Harrisons' family friend owned a luxury car service and had already been contracted. Even traditional mother-of-the-groom roles were systematically eliminated. When I asked about the rehearsal dinner, typically hosted by the groom's family, Catherine Harrison sweetly informed me they had already reserved a private room at their club, as it would be simpler than finding an appropriate venue from out of town. 4 months before the wedding, I flew to Connecticut for what the invitation called a wedding wardrobe weekend. I assumed this would include shopping for mother-of-the-groom attire, a special tradition I had looked forward to sharing with Tyler. Instead, I discovered upon arrival that the bride's mother wedding party and Audrey had already completed their shopping the previous day. My participation consisted of viewing their selections in a private showing at the bridal salon. "We didn't want to overwhelm you with all the decisions," Catherine explained as I admired Audrey's $15,000 designer gown, a dress my money would be paying for. "I know these high-end boutiques can be intimidating if you're not used to them." The irony of her condescension about boutiques to someone who owned a successful chain of them might have been amusing under different circumstances. Instead, I smiled politely and congratulated Audrey on her beautiful selection. That evening, I went alone to Bergdorf Goodman and purchased a designer dress in deep emerald that complemented my auburn hair. It cost nearly $6,000, an extravagance I had never before allowed myself, but I was determined not to look out of place at my only son's wedding. When I returned to Michigan, I threw myself into work focusing on the upcoming seasonal buying trip that would normally have been my priority instead of postponing it for wedding planning. My sister Grace, who had watched the situation unfold with increasing concern, finally confronted me over Sunday dinner at her house. "You're letting these people walk all over you, Ruby," she said bluntly. $250,000 for a wedding where you're treated like an unwelcome extra. This isn't like you." "It's not about me," I replied, pushing food around my plate. "It's about Tyler being happy." "Is he?" Grace challenged. "Or is he just desperate to fit into Audrey's world at any cost, including how his mother is treated?" I had no answer for that. The truth was, Tyler did seem happy in the glimpses I got of him, proud to be joining this prestigious family, excited about the elaborate celebration. If the cost of that happiness was my dignity and bank account, wasn't that what mothers did? Sacrifice for their children's happiness? 3 months before the wedding, my flagship boutique won a national retail award for innovation in customer experience. It was the professional recognition I had worked toward for decades, validation of my business model and vision. I called Tyler immediately, eager to share the news. "That's great, Mom," he said, distraction evident in his voice. "Hey, can I call you back? We're meeting with the calligrapher about place cards." He didn't call back. When I followed up 3 days later, he had forgotten about the award entirely. The bridal shower was another exercise in subtle exclusion. I arrived to find myself seated at the furthest table from Audrey while Katherine Harrison occupied the place of honor beside her daughter. During the gift opening, my carefully selected crystal vase was acknowledged with a cursory thank you, while Katherine's silver service received several minutes of appreciation and stories about its provenance. During a restroom break, I overheard 2 of Audrey's bridesmaids giggling by the sinks. "Can you believe Tyler's mom's accent, pure Midwest factory town?" "I know." "And did you see those shoes with that dress money really can't buy class?" I remained in the stall until they left, then washed my hands with steady deliberation, looking at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me had built something from nothing, had raised a son alone, had sacrificed for decades to provide opportunities she never had. Why was I allowing these people to make me feel small? But I knew why. Because Tyler had chosen this world. Because he moved through it with an ease I would never possess. Because his happiness seemed contingent on his complete integration into this circle that viewed me as an embarrassing footnote to his origin story. 2 weeks before the wedding, I received the final reception timeline. The father-daughter dance was highlighted, as was Audrey's dance with her grandfather, a federal judge. I scanned the document twice before realizing what was missing. There was no mother-son dance scheduled. I called Tyler immediately. "The timeline doesn't include our dance," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "I thought we had decided on the Louis Armstrong song." "About that?" Tyler replied, his voice taking on the careful tone I had come to recognize as preceding disappointment. "We had to make some adjustments to fit everything in. The band has a strict end time due to venue restrictions." "I see," I said quietly. "And our dance was the element that didn't make the cut." "Mom, it's not like that. We had to trim several things. Audrey's cousin isn't doing his toast either." The comparison between a mother-son dance and a cousin's toast spoke volumes about where I ranked in the wedding priorities. I swallowed the hurt rising in my throat. "I understand," I said, not understanding at all. "It's your day. It should be exactly what you and Audrey want." But the real blow, the one I never could have anticipated, despite all the warning signs, came just 2 days before the wedding. I had arrived in Greenwich and checked into my hotel preparing for the rehearsal dinner that evening. My phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "Mom, maybe just come for the ceremony only. The reception is going to be pretty formal, and Audrey's family thinks it might be better this way." I stared at those words, reading them over and over, unable to process their meaning. My son was uninviting me from his wedding reception, the reception I had paid for, the reception that represented the culmination of a lifetime of sacrifice to give him every opportunity. As the full impact sank in my hands began to shake, I sat heavily on the edge of the hotel bed, tears blurring my vision. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think beyond the searing pain of rejection. Then something shifted inside me. A lifetime of bending, accommodating, and sacrificing had led to this moment. My son believed it was acceptable to treat me this way, and I had taught him that through years of placing his needs and wants above my own dignity. In that hotel room, staring at a text message that crystallized everything wrong with our relationship, I made a decision. This pattern would end today. Whatever happened next, I would face it with the same strength and determination that had built my business and raised my son. I would attend that wedding, all of it, but I would do so on my terms. I read Tyler's text message one more time, letting the reality of it sink in. My son was excluding me from his wedding reception at the request of his future in-laws. The same reception where every flower arrangement, champagne glass, and past hors d'oeuvre had been paid for with my hard-earned money. My first instinct was to call Grace. My sister had been my rock through every crisis since childhood, and her practical wisdom had guided me through many difficult moments. I dialed with shaking hands. They did what? Grace's voice rose in disbelief when I read her the text. Ruby, this is beyond insulting. This is cruel. I know, I whispered, tears threatening again. You need to pull the funding, Grace said firmly. Right now. Call the vendors and tell them payment is on hold. The thought had crossed my mind too, a flash of vindictive satisfaction at imagining the chaos that would ensue. But that wasn't who I was, and it wasn't what I wanted for Tyler, despite everything. I can't do that to him, Grace. It's his wedding day. He's doing this to you, Ruby, on a day that should honor both of your families. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I'm not going to sink to their level, but I'm also not going to quietly accept being pushed aside. What are you going to do? Grace asked. I'm going to get ready for the rehearsal dinner. And tomorrow, I'm attending both the ceremony and reception, dressed in my $6,000 gown, with my head held high. After hanging up, I sat at the hotel desk and wrote down every sacrifice I had made for Tyler. Not to dwell on them, but to remind myself of my own strength. I had raised him alone when James left us with nothing. I had built a business while being a full-time mother. I had put his education and opportunities ahead of my own needs for decades. I had done all this out of love, not obligation. And while that love remained unchanged, it was time to balance it with self-respect. The rehearsal dinner that evening was at the Harrison family's country club, a bastion of old money with portraits of distinguished members lining wood-paneled walls. I arrived early, determined to project confidence despite my inner turmoil. Catherine Harrison greeted me with her usual practice smile. Ruby, I'm so glad you could join us. We've seated you with some lovely family friends who are dying to hear all about Michigan. Translation: I was being quarantined at a distant table with other misfit guests. I nodded politely, but made a point of circulating during the cocktail hour, introducing myself to key members of the Harrison family and their social circle. I'm Ruby Crawford, Tyler's mother, I said repeatedly, offering my hand with the firm grip I used in business meetings. So pleased to meet you. Tyler has told me wonderful things about your family's friendship with the Harrisons. Most responded with polite surprise, clearly having heard little about me. A few showed genuine warmth, particularly older members of the family who seemed less concerned with maintaining social hierarchies. When I finally found Tyler, he was standing with Audrey and her father near the bar. His eyes widened slightly at my approach, a flash of what looked like guilt crossing his features. Mom, he said, leaning in for a brief cheek kiss. You remember Audrey's father, Edward Harrison. Of course. I smiled, extending my hand. Lovely to see you again, Edward. Thank you for hosting this beautiful dinner. Edward Harrison was tall and distinguished, with the confident bearing of someone who had never questioned his place in the world. Ruby, good to have you with us. I understand you'll be attending the ceremony tomorrow. The direct reference to Tyler's text made my smile freeze momentarily, but I recovered quickly. Actually, I'm looking forward to the entire celebration. It's not every day your only child gets married. Tyler shifted uncomfortably beside me. Mom, did you get my message earlier about the reception? I did, I replied calmly. And I've decided that as the person who provided the financial backing for this wedding, I'll be attending both ceremony and reception. But we can discuss that later. This isn't the time or place. Edward Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly, his gaze reassessing me with new interest. Audrey's smile remained fixed in place, but her eyes hardened. Financial backing, Edward repeated. I thought we agreed the Harrisons would handle the majority of expenses with you contributing what you could. So Tyler hadn't been honest with them either. Interesting. Perhaps there's been a miscommunication, I said smoothly. I've covered all vendor contracts, totaling just under $250,000, including the recent upgrade to the Rosewood estate. Edward's expression shifted from surprise to something approaching respect. I see. We should discuss this further at a more appropriate time. Absolutely, I agreed. For now, let's focus on celebrating Tyler and Audrey's relationship. As I moved away to find my assigned table, I caught Tyler following me with his eyes, confusion and worry evident on his face. For the first time in months, I felt like I had regained some measure of control in a situation that had spiraled far beyond what I had ever imagined. The dinner proceeded with formal politeness speeches celebrating the couple and their bright future. I noticed that no one had asked me to speak, another traditional mother-of-the-groom role eliminated. When Tyler's future father-in-law raised a toast to the joining of our families, his gaze passed over me as if I were invisible. After dinner, as guests began to depart, Tyler approached my table. Mom, can we talk outside for a minute? On the terrace, away from prying ears, his composure faltered. What was that about with Mr. Harrison? Why did you tell him you paid for everything? Because I did pay for everything, Tyler, I replied steadily. Every invoice has been processed through my accounts. But you knew the plan was for them to think they were covering most of it, he said, running a hand through his hair in agitation. It's important to Audrey that her family is seen as the primary host. I understand image is important to the Harrisons, I said. But reality matters too. And the reality is that I'm your mother. I've contributed significantly to this wedding, and I will be attending the full celebration. Mom, please. Tyler's voice dropped to an urgent whisper. Don't make this difficult. Audrey's already stressed about everything being perfect. Her mother has invited the governor and 2 state senators. I'm not the one making this difficult, I pointed out. I'm simply declining to be erased from my son's wedding day. Tyler looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, part frustration, part embarrassment, and something else that might have been guilt. Fine, but please just try to blend in tomorrow. Wear something conservative. Don't talk too much about the boutiques. Each word was a small cut. Don't be yourself. Don't remind people of your background. Don't embarrass me with your existence. I'll be myself, I said quietly. The self that raised you, loved you, and made all this possible. If that's not good enough for your new family, then that's something you'll need to reconcile for yourself. I left him standing on the terrace, returning to my hotel, with a curious mixture of sadness and resolve. Tomorrow would be challenging, but I was no stranger to difficult situations. I had faced down bankruptcy, single parenthood, and countless business crises. I could certainly face a wedding reception where I wasn't wanted. That night, I laid out my emerald gown, checking it for any imperfections. I set my alarm early, arranging for the hotel's salon to style my hair and do my makeup. If I was going to stand my ground, I would do so, looking every inch the successful businesswoman I was. Morning came too quickly after a night of fitful sleep. As I prepared for the day ahead, I focused on Tyler. Not the young man who had sent that text, but the little boy who had once made me a Mother's Day card declaring me the strongest mom in the world. Somewhere inside the person he had become was still that child who had loved me without reservation. This thought gave me strength as I slipped into my gown, applied a final touch of lipstick, and headed for the church where my son would begin his married life, with or without my blessing. The historic stone church was decorated with cascades of white roses and ivy, their fragrance filling the air as guests arrived in their finery. I presented my invitation to the young usher who consulted his list with a slight frown. Mrs. Crawford, I don't seem to have your seating assignment here. I'm the mother of the groom, I said firmly. His eyes widened in recognition. Oh, I'm so sorry. Let me find someone who can help. He hurried away, returning moments later with an older gentleman who introduced himself as the wedding coordinator. There seems to be some confusion, he said diplomatically. The mother of the groom traditionally sits in the front row on the right side, but that section has been arranged differently for this ceremony. Where am I seated? I asked directly. He consulted his tablet. You're in row 5 on the aisle. Row 5, behind numerous Harrison relatives and family friends. I took a deep breath and nodded. Thank you. As I was escorted to my seat, I noticed Catherine Harrison being led to the front row, a special corsage adorning her wrist, another traditional mother of the groom element that had been reassigned. Beside her sat elderly relatives I recognized from the rehearsal dinner, occupying spaces that would normally include the groom's family. I sat with perfect posture, smiling graciously at those around me. The woman beside me introduced herself as a Harrison cousin, her curious gaze taking in my designer dress and jewelry. Are you a family friend? She asked. I'm Tyler's mother, I replied. Oh, her surprise was poorly concealed. I didn't realize. Catherine mentioned Tyler was raised by a single mother somewhere in the Midwest. Michigan, I confirmed. I raised him while building my business from the ground up. How interesting, she murmured clearly, uncertain how to categorize me in her social hierarchy. The ceremony itself was undeniably beautiful. When Tyler appeared at the altar handsome in his custom tuxedo, my heart swelled with maternal pride despite everything. This was still my son, the center of my world for 28 years. Audrey was a vision in her designer gown as she processed down the aisle on her father's arm. I noticed small details that my money had provided. The custom runner beneath her feet, the string quartet playing Pachelbel, the hand-calligraphed programs on each seat. The vows were traditional, the exchange of rings smooth and practiced. As Tyler and Audrey were pronounced husband and wife, I blinked back tears. Some of joy for this milestone in my son's life, some of sadness for how far apart we had grown. After the ceremony, guests gathered outside for photographs. The wedding party assembled on the church steps. A collection of beautiful people in designer attire, posing in various configurations directed by the photographer. I stood to the side, waiting for the inevitable family photos that would include me. 20 minutes passed before Tyler finally beckoned me over the photographer, looking impatient. Mrs. Crawford, we need a quick photo with you and Tyler, he said, positioning me beside my son. And one with both mothers, Tyler suggested tentatively. Catherine Harrison joined us standing on Tyler's other side. The contrast between us was striking. Her in pale blue silk, with pearl buttons that exactly matched the bridal party accents, me in my emerald green that suddenly felt like a statement of defiance. 3 quick photos, and I was dismissed, the photographer moving on to elaborate group shots of the Harrison family from various configurations. I overheard Audrey explain to him, "We want to make sure to get all the important family groupings." The message was clear. I was not considered part of the important family. As guests began departing for the reception at Rosewood Estate, I followed in the hired car I had arranged, mentally preparing for the next phase of this challenging day. The estate was spectacular, a historic mansion set on manicured grounds with views of Long Island Sound. White tents gleamed on the lawn, floral arrangements spilled from every available surface, and staff, in formal attire, stood ready to attend to guests' needs. I approached the reception tent entrance where a young woman checked names against the guest list. When I provided my name, she smiled apologetically. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Crawford. I don't see you on the reception list." Despite expecting this, the public confirmation stung. "There must be an error. I'm the mother of the groom." Her discomfort was evident as she checked again. "Let me get the coordinator." While waiting, I glanced around the gathering guests, noting the photographer capturing arrival shots. A waiter passed with champagne flutes, and I took one, sipping slowly to calm my nerves. The wedding coordinator appeared, tablet in hand. Mrs. Crawford, there seems to be a miscommunication. Let me sort this out immediately." He disappeared into the tent, returning minutes later with a forced smile. "Please come in. Your table assignment is being arranged." Inside the tent was transformed into a fairy tale setting. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling tables were adorned with elaborate centerpieces of white roses and orchids, and a string orchestra played softly in the corner. The dance floor gleamed, waiting for the couple's first dance. Everything was exactly as specified in the contracts I had signed and paid for. The coordinator led me to a small table near the back, far from the head table, where Tyler and Audrey would sit with her parents and the wedding party. "We've added a place setting for you here," he explained awkwardly. "The original seating chart had different arrangements." I thanked him calmly, scanning the tent for familiar faces. Grace had offered to accompany me to the wedding, but I had declined, not wanting to subject her to this treatment. Now I wished I had accepted her offer, if only to have one friendly face in the crowd. Guests filtered in, finding their assigned tables with excitement and admiration for the elegant setting. I watched as Audrey's extended family filled the prime tables near the front, followed by friends of the Harrisons, who greeted each other with the easy familiarity of a tight social circle. When Tyler and Audrey made their grand entrance, the tent erupted in applause. They looked perfect together. He handsome and confident, she radiant in her expensive gown. They moved directly to the dance floor for their first dance, gazing into each other's eyes, as if no one else existed. Next came Audrey's dance with her father, a touching moment set to a classic Frank Sinatra song. Edward Harrison moved with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to formal events, his pride in his daughter evident in his expression. Where there would traditionally have been a mother-son dance, the program instead listed a special dance between Audrey and her grandfather, the federal judge. I watched from my distant table as they took the floor, the elderly gentleman beaming with pride as he waltzed with his granddaughter. During dinner service, I maintained my composure, making pleasant conversation with the distant Harrison relatives seated at my table. They asked polite questions about Michigan and made vague comments about how interesting it must be to own retail stores. I answered graciously, neither hiding my accomplishments nor flaunting them. After the main course, I decided to visit the restroom to collect myself before the toasts began. As I stood, I noticed Audrey across the tent, surrounded by bridesmaids radiant in her expensive gown that my money had purchased. Our eyes met briefly before she turned away, leaning to whisper something to her maid of honor that caused both women to glance in my direction with poorly concealed amusement. In the elegant restroom, I checked my appearance in the mirror, reapplying lipstick with steady hands. As I was about to leave, the door opened and Audrey entered with two bridesmaids. They fell silent upon seeing me exchanging glances. "Ruby," Audrey acknowledged coolly. "I'm surprised to see you here. Tyler mentioned you might not attend the reception." "I wouldn't miss my son's wedding celebration," I replied evenly. "The rosewood is beautiful. You've created a lovely event." "Yes, well, my family has certain standards for these things," she said, examining her reflection rather than looking at me. "It's important that everything reflects the right aesthetic." I recognized the opening for what it was, an opportunity to respond with anger to create a scene that would confirm their worst opinions of me. Instead, I smiled. "The aesthetic is certainly impressive. I'm glad my contribution could help create your perfect day." Her eyes flickered to mine in the mirror, uncertainty crossing her features. "Your contribution?" "Yes. The entire wedding. Every arrangement, place setting, and champagne toast." I moved toward the door, pausing with my hand on the handle. "Including that beautiful gown. Congratulations again, Audrey. Welcome to the family." I left before she could respond, returning to the reception with renewed determination. As I approached my table, I noticed Tyler in conversation with his new father-in-law, both men looking serious. When Tyler spotted me, he excused himself and intercepted me before I could reach my seat. "Mom, "What did you say to Audrey?" he asked, voice low and tense. I congratulated her on a beautiful wedding and mentioned that I was happy my contribution could help create her perfect day. I replied honestly. Tyler ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture he had inherited from his father. "She seems upset. She said you were claiming credit for the wedding." "Not claiming credit, Tyler. Stating facts. I paid for this wedding. All of it." "Mom, please don't do this. Not today." His expression was pained. "Can't you just be happy for me without making everything about you?" The irony of his statement, after months of being systematically excluded from every aspect of his wedding, was breathtaking. "I am happy for you," I said softly. "I love you enough to spend $250,000 on a celebration where I'm seated in the back corner and uninvited entirely until I insisted otherwise. That's not making things about me. That's being erased despite my contributions." Before he could respond, Audrey appeared at his elbow, her smile fixed in place, but her eyes cold. "Tyler, Daddy needs you for the toasts." As they walked away, I heard her murmur, "I can't believe your mom is trying to take credit for my parents' reception. Talk about new money trash." The words hit me like a physical blow, especially coming from a woman wearing a dress my money had purchased celebrating in a venue my funds had secured. In that moment, something crystallized within me. I had spent my life accommodating others, making myself smaller to make room for my son's growth and ambitions. But there was a difference between selfless love and self-erasure. I returned to my table, sitting quietly as the toasts began. Edward Harrison spoke eloquently about family legacy and welcoming Tyler into their fold. Audrey's maid of honor shared childhood memories and wishes for the couple's future. The best man, Tyler's college roommate, told amusing stories of their university days, carefully edited to present Tyler in the most sophisticated light. No one had asked me to speak. No one had thought the mother who raised him alone might have something meaningful to contribute to this celebration of his life milestone. As coffee and dessert were served, I made a decision. I stood and quietly approached the wedding coordinator who was supervising the cake-cutting preparations. "Excuse me," I said politely. "I'd like to speak with the venue manager, please." "Is there a problem with the service?" he asked, concern evident in his expression. "No problem. I just need to discuss something regarding the financial arrangements." Minutes later, I was escorted to a small office where the Rosewood estate manager greeted me warmly. "Mrs. Crawford, how can I help you?" I placed my handbag on his desk and withdrew a folder containing copies of all the wedding contracts and payment confirmations. "I wanted to verify something about the payment structure for today's event." He reviewed the documents, nodding. "Yes, everything has been paid in full by you, Mrs. Crawford. Is there a concern?" "Not a concern exactly. I understand from conversations today that there may be some confusion about who actually funded this wedding. I wanted to confirm that I am listed as the sole financial contributor." "That's correct," he confirmed, turning his computer monitor so I could see the contract details. "Your name is on every vendor agreement and all payments have come from your accounts." "Thank you," I said. "One more question. As the person who paid for this event, do I have any say in how the remainder of the evening proceeds?" The manager looked slightly uncomfortable, but nodded. "Technically, yes. As the contracting party, you have certain rights regarding the event execution." "I'm not looking to disrupt my son's wedding," I assured him. "But I would appreciate the opportunity to offer a toast. As the mother of the groom, that would traditionally be my right." Understanding dawned in his eyes. He had likely witnessed enough family dynamics at these events to recognize the situation. "Of course. I'll speak with the coordinator immediately." When I returned to the reception, the cake cutting was just concluding. As servers distributed slices to the guests, the wedding coordinator approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we open the dance floor, we have one more special toast. Mrs. Ruby Crawford, mother of the groom, would like to say a few words." A murmur of surprise rippled through the tent. At the head table, Audrey's expression froze, while Catherine Harrison whispered something to her husband. Tyler straightened in his chair, his eyes finding mine across the room with a mixture of alarm and confusion. I walked to the microphone with measured steps, my emerald dress catching the light from the crystal chandeliers. Taking the microphone with a steady hand, I smiled at the assembled guests. Thank you all for being here to celebrate Tyler and Audrey's special day. I began, my voice clear and composed. As Tyler's mother, it has been my greatest joy to watch him grow into the remarkable man he is today. I paused, looking directly at my son. From the moment he came into my life, Tyler has been my priority. Like many parents, I worked hard to give him every opportunity. The best education, enriching experiences, and the freedom to pursue his dreams. I turned slightly to include Audrey in my gaze. Today marks a new chapter in Tyler's life. Audrey, you are gaining not just a husband, but a man who was raised to value family above all else. I hope that the commitment to family he learned from me will serve you both well in your marriage. Several guests nodded approvingly, unaware of the subtext beneath my words. When Tyler told me he had found someone special, someone he wanted to build a life with, I was overjoyed. And when he became engaged, I immediately offered to help create the wedding day of their dreams. I smiled at the crowd. Looking around this beautiful reception, every flower arrangement, every crystal glass, every musical note, I see that dream realized. As my gift to Tyler and Audrey, I wanted to provide this celebration as a foundation for their new beginning together. Audrey's parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats as understanding began to dawn among some of the guests. They say that a parent's greatest accomplishment is raising a child who no longer needs them, I continued. Today, I recognize that Tyler has fully embraced his new family and their values. While that transition isn't always easy for a mother to witness, I respect his choices. I raised my champagne glass. To Tyler and Audrey, may your marriage be built on honesty, mutual respect, and appreciation for each other's contributions, both seen and unseen. May you never take for granted the sacrifices made on your behalf. As I finished speaking, a strange silence hung over the tent before guests automatically raised their glasses and echoed, "To Tyler and Audrey." I returned to my table amid confused whispers and questioning glances between guests. At the head table, Edward Harrison was leaning toward Tyler, his expression demanding answers. Audrey's face had flushed deep red, while Catherine Harrison maintained a rigid smile that didn't reach her eyes. The orchestra quickly began playing, and the coordinator announced the dance floor was open. As couples moved to begin dancing, I gathered my evening bag and shawl. My purpose here was complete. I had spoken my truth with dignity, neither causing a scene nor allowing myself to be erased from my son's narrative. As I moved toward the exit, Catherine Harrison intercepted me, her practiced social smile firmly in place, but strain evident around her eyes. "Ruby, there seems to have been some misunderstanding about the financial arrangements for the wedding," she said quietly. Edward and I were under the impression that we were the primary hosts. "A reasonable assumption given traditional wedding customs," I acknowledged. "But in this case, I covered all expenses. Perhaps Tyler wasn't clear about the arrangements." "Had we known," she continued, her voice tight, "we certainly would have included you more prominently in the proceedings." "Would you?" I asked gently. "Or would you have rejected my financial contribution to maintain control of the narrative?" Her silence was answer enough. "It doesn't matter now," I said. "The wedding is beautiful and Tyler seems happy. That was always my goal." "You're leaving?" she asked, noting my gathered belongings. "Yes, I've fulfilled my obligations as Tyler's mother and as the financial backer of this event. Now it's time to let them begin their married life without my presence causing further discomfort." As I turned to leave, I spotted Tyler making his way toward us through the dancing guests. His expression was a complex mixture of embarrassment, anger, and something that might have been shame. For a moment, I considered waiting for him having one final conversation. But what would it accomplish? This wasn't the time for accusations or explanations. We both needed space to process what had happened and what it meant for our relationship going forward. Instead, I walked with quiet dignity toward the exit where my car was waiting. As I stepped into the warm evening air, I heard Tyler call my name, his voice carrying across the lawn. I didn't turn back. Some conversations were better had in the clear light of day when emotions weren't heightened by champagne and public scrutiny. In the car, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of the day. The hurt, the anger, the disappointment, but also the strange liberation that came with finally standing up for myself. I had spent 28 years putting Tyler's needs before my own. Perhaps it was time to recalibrate that balance. As the car pulled away from Rosewood Estate, I looked back once at the twinkling lights of the reception tent. Inside, my son was dancing with his new wife, surrounded by her family and friends, celebrating a milestone I had helped make possible. Whether he would ever truly understand or appreciate that contribution remained to be seen. For now, I would return to my hotel order room service and begin planning the next chapter of my own life, one where my worth wasn't determined by how well I could disappear into the background of someone else's story. 3 weeks after the wedding, I was back in Michigan, immersed in work at my boutique headquarters. The floor-to-ceiling windows of my office overlooked the downtown district where my first tiny shop had once struggled to survive. Now, the Ruby Crawford boutique brand occupied a full city block with additional locations across 3 states. The familiar rhythm of business decisions and creative challenges provided comfort as I processed the wedding aftermath. Tyler had called repeatedly during my flight home and in the days that followed. I had let each call go to voicemail, not yet ready for the conversation we needed to have. His messages had evolved from defensive, "I can't believe you did that at our reception," to confused, "Why didn't you tell me you paid for everything?" to eventually apologetic, "Mom, please call me back. I need to talk to you." Grace, who had appointed herself my protective barrier, reviewed each message before advising me on when I might be ready to respond. "He needs to sit with this discomfort for a while," she insisted. "Let him really think about how he treated you." Instead of dwelling on the hurt, I channeled my energy into a business expansion I had postponed to fund the wedding. Plans for a Chicago location had been on hold for 2 years. Ironically, in the same upscale neighborhood where Tyler and Audrey now lived. The irony wasn't lost on me as I reviewed potential retail spaces with my commercial real estate agent. "This corner location has exceptional visibility," the agent explained during a video call, walking through a vacant storefront with her phone camera. "Foot traffic is primarily affluent professionals and luxury shoppers, exactly your target demographic. The windows are perfect for seasonal displays," I noted, visualizing how our signature style would translate to this prestigious address. "What's the timeline for availability?" "We can begin build-out next month. You could potentially open by the holiday season." That evening, I sat on my back porch with a glass of wine reviewing the proposal and financial projections. The Chicago expansion would require significant capital that would have been more readily available had I not spent $250,000 on Tyler's wedding. But regret wasn't productive. I had made those choices based on love, even if that love had been poorly reciprocated. Now, I would make new choices based on both love for my business and respect for myself. Grace joined me for dinner, bringing a homemade lasagna and her characteristic bluntness. "Tyler called me today," she announced as she set the table. "Wanted to know if you were still upset or just busy." "What did you tell him?" I asked, unsurprised that he had reached out to my sister as an intermediary. "That you're a grown woman running a successful business who will call him when you're ready." She shrugged. He didn't like that answer much. "I will call him," I assured her. "Just not yet. I'm still sorting through my own feelings." "And those feelings are?" Grace prompted, serving generous portions of lasagna. I considered the question carefully. Disappointed, hurt, but also Relieved, in a way. Relieved? Yes. For years, I've been fighting this sense that Tyler was embarrassed by me, that I was never quite enough for the life he wanted. Now it's out in the open. The pretense is gone. Grace nodded slowly. And without the pretense, you can decide what kind of relationship you actually want with him, not just accommodate whatever scraps he offers. The truth of her statement resonated deeply. For too long, I had accepted an increasingly diminished role in Tyler's life, grateful for any inclusion. The wedding had simply crystallized a pattern that had been developing for years. Later that week, I received an unexpected email from a national business magazine requesting an interview. They were featuring female entrepreneurs who had built successful businesses outside traditional venture capital pathways, and my boutique chain had caught their attention. The interview was scheduled for the following Monday. I spent the weekend reviewing our growth metrics and refreshing my knowledge of current retail trends. This was an opportunity to position Ruby Crawford boutiques for national recognition, potentially accelerating our expansion plans. The interviewer, a thoughtful woman in her 30s, arrived at my flagship store promptly at 9. We toured the space as I explained our business model and customer approach. "What makes your boutiques different from other luxury retailers?" she asked as we settled in my office for the formal interview. "Connection," I replied without hesitation. "In a world of anonymous shopping, we create relationships. Every associate knows our regular customers by name, remembers their preferences, and understands their lifestyle needs. We're not just selling clothes, we're providing a shopping experience that makes women feel seen and valued." Her questions were insightful, exploring both business strategy and personal journey. When she asked about challenges I had overcome, I spoke candidly about starting with nothing about building a business while raising a child alone. "How did you balance motherhood with entrepreneurship?" she inquired. I smiled, thinking of the countless nights spent working after Tyler was asleep, the business meetings scheduled around school events, the careful financial juggling to provide opportunities for him while keeping the business growing. "Imperfectly," I admitted. There were days when business demands meant missing a soccer game, and times when parenting needs required postponing business opportunities. But I tried to be fully present wherever I was, and to involve my son in the business journey so he understood why it mattered. "And has he followed in your entrepreneurial footsteps?" A month ago, this question would have stung, highlighting the distance between my world and Tyler's chosen path. Now I could answer honestly without that pain. "No, he's chosen a different direction. He works in finance, which suits his analytical mind. But I like to think the work ethic and resilience he witnessed growing up have served him well." The interview concluded with photographs for the magazine spread, the photographer capturing me in various settings around the boutique. As the media team packed up, the interviewer shook my hand warmly. "This will be published in our October issue just in time for your Chicago opening," she informed me. "We'd love to follow up then for a piece on successful business expansion." After they left, I sat alone in my office reflecting on the strange juxtaposition of professional recognition and personal disappointment. The business world valued exactly what my son and his new family seemed to dismiss: my self-made success, my persistence, my authenticity. That evening, 6 weeks after the wedding, I finally replied to one of Tyler's texts with a brief message. "I'm ready to talk when you are. Coffee, not a phone call." His response was immediate. "Tomorrow, anytime, anywhere." We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a quiet cafe midway between my home and his office. I arrived early, selecting a table in the corner that offered privacy without isolation. When Tyler walked in, I was struck by how tired he looked, shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there on his wedding day. "Mom," he said, voice thick with emotion as he approached. I stood to greet him with a brief hug, neither warm nor cold, before gesturing for him to sit. He fidgeted with his coffee cup, clearly uncertain how to begin. "How are you?" he finally asked. "I'm well," I replied honestly. Busy with the business. We're expanding to Chicago. That's great, he said, genuine interest flickering across his features. The Chicago market is strong for luxury retail right now. I nodded, waiting for him to address what we both knew was the real purpose of this meeting. After a long moment, he sighed heavily. Mom, I don't even know where to start. The wedding was... I handled everything so badly. Yes, I agreed simply. You did. He flinched slightly at my directness. I got caught between what Audrey and her family expected and what I owed you. I made the wrong choice. I'm sorry. Thank you for that, I acknowledged. But I need to understand why, Tyler. When did I become someone to be embarrassed by? When did my love and support become something to hide rather than appreciate? He stared into his coffee shoulders hunched. It wasn't one moment. It was gradual. When I started at Meridian, everyone came from these polished backgrounds with family connections. My story of a single mom who ran boutiques didn't fit. So you began reinventing yourself, I suggested. Yes, he admitted. And then I met Audrey, and her family was so particular about everything. Where people went to school, what clubs they belonged to, which families they knew. It was easier to minimize you than explain you. The candor hurt, but I appreciated it more than continued evasion. And the wedding, asking me to skip the reception I paid for? Tyler winced visibly. That was after Catherine found out you were wearing emerald instead of the pale blue she had suggested for family photos. She convinced Audrey it would ruin their aesthetic. I knew it was wrong, but I was trying to keep everyone happy. Everyone except me, I pointed out. Yes. His voice dropped to a whisper. I convinced myself you would understand, because you always have. You've always put me first. There it was, the dynamic I had created and reinforced over decades. My son had learned that my feelings could be sacrificed because I had consistently taught him exactly that. That was my mistake, I said quietly. I showed you that my dignity was less important than your comfort. That's not a healthy lesson for either of us. He looked up surprised. You're blaming yourself. I'm recognizing my part in this pattern, I clarified. You're a grown man, Tyler. Your choices are your own. But I helped create the expectation that I would accept any treatment as long as it came from you. A silence fell between us as he processed my words. Finally, he asked, "Where does this leave us?" It was the question I had been considering for 6 weeks. I will always be your mother, and I will always love you. That doesn't change, but our relationship needs to change. I deserve basic respect, not just as your mother, but as a person. Of course you do, he agreed quickly. I want to fix this. It's not about quick fixes, I explained. It's about sustained change. If your relationship with Audrey and her family requires diminishing me, then we have a fundamental problem. Tyler shifted uncomfortably. Things with Audrey have been strained since the wedding. Your toast made her realize you paid for everything. She assumed her parents had covered most costs. When she found out the truth, she was embarrassed, I finished for him. Yes, and angry that I hadn't been honest. Her father was furious, said I made him look like he couldn't provide for his daughter's wedding. I felt a flash of sympathy for Tyler caught in a web partly of his own making. Financial transparency is generally important in marriages, I observed neutrally. We're figuring that out, he said ruefully. Her expectations about our lifestyle are based on her family's wealth, not my actual income. I've been trying to keep up appearances, but it's not sustainable. And you're discovering that authenticity matters, I suggested. He nodded slowly. I've been living like I'm ashamed of where I came from, who I am. The irony is that all those guys at work with fancy family names, They respect self-made success more than inherited position. I've been hiding my best asset, having a mother who built something from nothing. The admission was unexpected and touching, but I remained cautious. Words were easy. Sustained change was harder. I appreciate you saying that, I told him. But rebuilding trust takes time. I know, he said quickly. I'm not expecting everything to be fixed today. I just want a chance to show you that I understand what I did wrong and that I'm committed to changing. We talked for another hour more openly than we had in years. I shared how his gradual distancing had affected me, and he acknowledged patterns of behavior he hadn't fully recognized. We didn't resolve everything, but it was a beginning, a foundation for a potentially healthier relationship built on mutual respect rather than one-sided accommodation. As we prepared to leave, Tyler asked hesitantly, "When are you coming to Chicago to look at retail spaces? Maybe we could have dinner." "Next month," I replied. "Dinner would be nice. Just us, though. I'm not ready for a couple's evening yet." He nodded, understanding the boundary. Just us. I'd like that. 3 months after the wedding, I finalized the lease on the Chicago boutique space. The business magazine feature had been published to positive response, generating buzz about our expansion. Orders for our fall collection had exceeded projections, and the financial outlook was strong despite the wedding expenditure. The Chicago trip coincided with an unexpected development. Audrey had reached out via email, her message formal but not hostile. "Ruby, I understand you'll be in Chicago next week for business. If you're amenable, I'd like to meet for coffee. There are things I believe we should discuss directly rather than through Tyler. Regards, Audrey Crawford." After careful consideration and consultation with Grace, I agreed to a brief meeting at a cafe near my hotel. I arrived precisely on time to find Audrey already seated, impeccably dressed in designer workwear, her expression carefully neutral. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she began as I sat across from her. "I imagine you had reservations." "Natural ones given our history," I acknowledged. "But I appreciate direct communication." She nodded, taking a measured sip of her tea before continuing. "I owe you an apology. My behavior before and during the wedding was inexcusable. I allowed my mother's prejudices and my own insecurities to dictate how I treated you." The apology was unexpected in its directness. "Thank you," I said simply. "May I ask what prompted this recognition?" Audrey's composure wavered slightly. "Several things. The realization that you had funded our entire wedding while being treated as an unwelcome obligation. Seeing Tyler's distress over the rift with you. And honestly, reading about you in National Business Monthly?" I raised an eyebrow, and she continued. "The article portrayed a savvy businesswoman who built a multi-state retail operation from nothing, who has appeared on industry panels and won retail innovation awards. Not the simple shopkeeper my mother described, or that I had imagined." "Perceptions are powerful," I observed. "They can blind us to the reality of who people actually are." "Yes," she agreed quietly. "I judged you based on superficial markers. Your accent, your background, the fact that you work in retail rather than a profession my family considers prestigious. I never bothered to know you as a person." Her candor was refreshing, though I remained guarded. "And now I'm trying to see more clearly, to recognize my own prejudices and how they've hurt others, including Tyler." She hesitated before adding, "And to understand that class markers aren't measures of character or worth." We talked for nearly an hour, the conversation gradually shifting from apology to genuine exchange. I learned that Audrey's family privilege had come with rigid expectations about maintaining appearances and social position. Her mother's approval had always been conditional on perfect adherence to unwritten rules of their social class. "It's exhausting," she admitted, always monitoring every word choice and association for how it might reflect on the family image. "That sounds like a difficult way to live," I said, finding unexpected compassion for this young woman I had viewed as my adversary. "It is," she agreed. "Watching how Tyler talks about you, your strength, your determination, your unconditional support, it's made me question a lot about my own family dynamics. When we parted, there was no dramatic reconciliation or promises of immediate friendship. Instead, there was something potentially more valuable: mutual recognition of each other's humanity and a tentative openness to a different type of relationship moving forward. That evening, I met Tyler for dinner at a restaurant near the site of my future boutique. The conversation flowed more naturally than it had in years, with Tyler showing genuine interest in my business plans and sharing his own work challenges without the veneer of perfection he had maintained previously. "Audrey told me you met today," he said as our dessert arrived. "How did that go?" "Better than expected," I replied honestly. "She's more self-aware than I gave her credit for." Tyler nodded. "She's been doing a lot of reflecting since the wedding. We both have. About the values we want in our marriage, about authenticity versus appearance." "Important reflections," I acknowledged. "Mom," he said, setting down his fork and meeting my eyes directly. "I want you to know that I'm not just saying what you want to hear. These past months have forced me to recognize how I've taken you for granted, how I've minimized your importance in my life to fit someone else's expectations." "I believe you mean that now," I said carefully. "But sustained change is what matters. Relationships need consistent care, not just crisis corrections." "I know," he agreed. "That's why I'd like us to commit to regular dinners when you're in Chicago for the boutique. And maybe you could stay with us sometimes instead of a hotel. Only if you're comfortable, of course." The offer represented a significant shift from his previous reluctance to have me in his home. "Let's start with dinners," I suggested, "one step at a time." 6 months after the wedding, I attended the grand opening of Ruby Crawford Boutique Chicago. The event drew fashion editors, local influencers, and a surprisingly large number of customers.